I went to Rhema, graduated from Rhema in 2004. I started working for the ministry there, and a couple months before I graduated. A couple months before I graduated, and as a writer, I was a writer on staff there for 8.5 years, and I had to cover many of your pastor's services when he would come and speak at camp meeting, and it was just always awesome just to be able to listen to him when he would come in and just bring it and just shuck the corn, as some people would say. And I had the opportunity of meeting Josh and Curtis when Josh came out and spoke at one of the youth events. I was really involved with the youth group out there and just got to be really good friends with both of them. And great guys for the most part. Curtis was telling me the other night that he was leading worship, and here I am sitting on the front row, obviously single-handed. And he's like, everybody put your hands together. And I'm like, Curtis, I can't. So everybody give a hand clap to the Lord. And I'm like, sorry, Jesus, I can't really do that for you. So, but just a good time. Just really just fallen in love with this church since I've been here. And just excited about what God did this morning, and just excited to see what God's going to do in this service as well. I know that God's up to something. There's just times when that He's up to something, and that's right now. So basically, I shared a message on Thursday that God had just kind of dropped in my heart that, was really meant for the men's conference. But normally when I go out and speak, I've been doing this for about 12 or 13 years now. I started when I was 10. So I've been doing this for about 12 or 13 years now. And yeah, if you believe that. But normally when I go out, I'm asked to share, my testimony about what God's done in my life. And, it's a little bit different from most people's. And you'll see why here in just a little bit. And I just love sharing what God's done in my life, because you'll find out where things went and where things could have been. Without Him, there is no me at all. I mean, it's not even close. And like I said, you'll kind of understand more of that as the story goes along. But we'll just kind of jump right into it. And just to let you know up front, I'm fairly rarely serious. I joke around a lot when I'm up here. So if I say something you think it's funny, go ahead and laugh. Because the people this morning, like I said something and I saw a couple of people trying not to, it really is okay. I'm sure Jesus laughed once or twice during His ministry. So feel free, if you think it's funny, laugh. If you think it's sad, cry. If I offend you, forgive me. I'm just I'm just me. I'm just going to stand up here and I'm just going to be as real as I can be and just tell you how good Jesus is. I'm just a one-armed white boy who loves Jesus, and that's just who I am. So we're just going to jump right into it. And the devil's kind of been after me for a long time. When I was born, the doctors only gave me a 50-50 chance at living because I was born with fluid in my lungs. And, I'm not a fish, so that wasn't really a good thing for me. And so, thankfully, we got that right 50. I picked the right 50%, and I was able to pull through that. Then, when I was 9 years old, this is something probably not as much the devil, just as me being a stupid 9-year-old. My family had gone down to Louisiana to visit some friends, and it was me and my sister, and she's 4 years older than me, which I like to point out as many times as possible. And we were, just in case she's watching online, love you. And the people we were going to visit, they had 2 daughters. And one of them was 1 year younger than me, and the other one was 3 years older than me. And so you're looking at age range between 13 and 8. And there's 4 of us in the house, and we are basically breaking stuff. And so they're thinking, what can we do to get them out of the house, to kind of wear them out? And so what they did was they took us to a public swimming pool. And when we pull up in the parking lot, as a little 9-year-old boy, the first thing I see when we get there is a high dive. And I'm like, yes, that looks like fun. I will be doing that repeatedly. And so sure enough, when we get there, I immediately head for the high dive. And I climb up the ladder, run, jump off, hit the water, swim over to the side, and that's all I did. I spent more time in the air falling to the water than I actually spent in the water. But I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't the smartest 9-year-old kid. I didn't climb a ladder like most people would climb a ladder, because you have to see me with 2 hands here for a second, so look really hard. But you know how when somebody climbs a ladder, they normally put one hand here, and then they'll put the next hand like You know what I'm saying? Like here, then there, and that's how you climb a ladder. I don't know why I'm telling you how to climb a ladder. I'm sure y'all know how. But with me, just being a dumb 9-year-old, I would I'd pull both feet up, I would let go with both hands. Wow, somebody already gasped. Nothing's even happened yet. I would let go with both hands, and then I would reach up and grab the next rung. I don't know why I did that. That's just what I was doing. And I did it every time I climbed the ladder. I did it that way. I would let go with both hands, reach up and grab, and just every time. Well, I don't know about you, but when I go swimming, I have a tendency to get wet. And so as I was climbing the ladder, one time I get all the way up to the top rung, and I let go, and I reached up to grab the top rung, and my hands slipped off. And I started to fall, and it was like I got parallel to the ground, and it was like something caught me and just pushed me back up. You know, and as a 9-year-old, I'm thinking, man, I got strong toes. You know, that's the only thing that comes to my mind. And I wasn't going to say anything because, you know, I didn't know if I'd get a spanking for climbing the ladder the wrong way. So I didn't tell my mom about that till I was in my 20s. You know, and I don't think she spanked me then. I don't think. But, you know, it was just like, I don't know what I was thinking. But, you know, as a 9-year-old falling off of a high dive, you know, on the cement, that wouldn't have ended well. So that one, I'm not really going to chalk that one up to the devil as much as just being a dumb 9-year-old and God being good and looking out for me. But then another time, July 22nd, 1993, I was 4 days away from leaving to go to my college orientation up at Appalachian State University. I was actually working 2 jobs at the time. I had been working at Taco Bell for 2 years. You know, I was a Taco Bell guy. You know, the guy, welcome to the border, can I take your order? You know, one of those deals. And yeah, I was classy. And like I said, I'd been working there for 2 years and just trying to make money. And then my dad said, hey, at the glass plant that he was working at the time, he said, we're bringing in some summer help just to, you know, try to let them earn some money before they go off to college. Is that something you'd be interested in? I was like, how much do they pay? And he told me, and I said, yes, because it was a lot more than what I was already getting paid, but I figured I'd just work both jobs, and so that's what I was doing. I was working 2 jobs at the time, and I had been working there, and like I said, there was 8 of us college students who were hired to go in, and basically they had us doing the work that nobody else would do. They had us doing the nasty stuff, the dirty stuff, I would come to work in jeans and a T-shirt and leave just all one color, just dirty. And it was like that every day that we were there. And so for the first 9 days, they had us working in an area called the hot end, and they called it the hot end because it's hot. That's where that comes from. That's where they got that. Because in the glass making process, they would run glass through a furnace, and if there were any imperfections in the glass would shatter and break and fall to the bottom of the furnace. Well, they had us sticking these really long metal rakes inside of these furnaces while they're on and dropping them down and then raking the glass out to the sides. And we're pulling these rakes out. And I don't know who was the genius who figured this idea up, but when you stick a metal rake inside of a hot furnace, it has a tendency to get hot. And so we're pulling it out, and I mean, every one of our forearms were just blistered from where we're pulling these rakes out. And so my 10th day on the job, they had kind of split our team up into 2, but 10th day they put us all back together, and they moved us out of the hot end, and I was like, thank goodness, because I'm so tired of you would work for about 5 minutes and then have to rest for 5 minutes because you're just pouring sweat the whole time because it's just that hot. So 10th day on the job, they put us all in an area called the silos. And this is where they basically start the glass making process. This is where I don't really know the best way to describe it. I call it the ingredients for making glass. And there's some powdery substances that they would use, and they had them up in these containers, and they would drop them down these chutes onto this big conveyor belt. Well, when this dust would land on the conveyor belt, it would billow up, and over years and years of time, it had gathered on the floor. And in some areas, it was 4, 5, 6 inches deep, and it's packed in. So what they wanted us to do was go in and bust that debris up off where it had packed in on the floor, load it into wheelbarrows, and then there we would take it and dump it into a machine called a screw auger. And when you dump it into the auger, it would go in here, and the auger went up a flight of stairs, and then the opening went into a dumpster. And so that's basically what we were doing on my 10th day on the job. And what I had been doing all day was I was the one with the shovel, busting the debris up, loading it into wheelbarrows, and then I was also the guy running the wheelbarrow back and forth. We went to lunch, and we come back, and everybody's like, hey, no, we don't have a supervisor out here. If we leave right now, nobody would know, and we could get out of here early. Well, my dad had been working at this plant for 23 years. And he told me when he got me the job, he said, it took me 23 years to earn a good reputation out here. Don't come ruin it in one summer. Yes, sir. Gotcha. Okay. So that was, my whole thing was when they said that, I was like, well, let's do at least a couple more loads, before we get out of here. And hoping that, once we got working, they just kind of let it go and we could actually finish our shift out, because I was scared of my dad. I'll just be honest. I didn't want to make my dad mad. And so we start working. And the first shift, the first load that we do when we come back, I was the guy that was put at the base of the screw auger. And basically, that person's job was, whenever the debris gets dumped into this auger, you just make sure it goes down okay. That's your job. Just make sure everything goes into the machine okay and that everything's operating properly. They didn't say, if it doesn't go down, this is what you do. They just said, make sure it goes down. So I'm standing there at the base of the auger. One of my buddies, I'd played baseball with him my whole life, and he came up and he dumps a load into the machine and he turns around and walks off. Well, I'm looking in, and one of the pieces of debris was a lot bigger than the other ones. And so when he dumped the debris in, it was just kind of sitting on the top. It wasn't going down into the threads of the screw auger the way it was supposed to. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, well, what am I supposed to? So I started looking around for something to break that big piece up with, and there was nothing there. And I didn't know it, but all the safety equipment had been taken off of this machine. There was supposed to be a grating over the opening of the machine so that you couldn't get even your fingers on the inside of it. But that had been taken off. And then there were supposed to be these things called kill strings, which were supposed to run up and down the side of the machine, where if anything goes wrong, all you have to do is tap it and the machine will shut off. Well, they had taken those off because, somebody might walk by the machine and accidentally bump into it, and then the machine shuts off, then you have to fire it back up. Well, they had taken all this safety equipment off, and I didn't know. So when I'm looking at this, only thing I see is this big chunk of debris sitting on top. So I just reached in to grab it, and I was going to take it out, and I was going to break it on the ground, and then I was going to put it back into the auger. Well, when I reached in, we had on these gloves called gauntlet gloves. And gauntlet gloves it's basically like a regular glove, but at the wrist it kind of flares out so that, I don't know why it flares out. That's just, I guess, like bell-bottom jeans for your wrist. And so they kind of just flared out. It was a stylish thing in the work industry, I guess. And so when I reached in and I grabbed that piece, I just went to lift up and I felt a tug. And so when I felt that, I immediately just jerked both of my hands back like that. And my left arm came out fine, and obviously my right arm didn't. And what had happened was the thread of the screw auger. A screw auger is basically a giant screw with a casing around it. And as it turns, the debris would get caught in the threads and just push it up. Well, one of those threads had caught the corner of my glove. And I'm going to pause it here for just a second, because twice in my life I've shared my testimony and had people pass out. So don't, okay? Can we just come to that agreement this morning? I won't go into a whole lot of detail if you promise not to pass out. Do we have an agreement? Okay, because that's distracting, so don't do that. I don't appreciate that, so just remain vertical, and I won't go into a whole lot of details. I didn't bring the pictures. The pictures would be, that seems to be the one that pushes people over the edge. So no pictures. I'll just describe it in as little detail as possible, but still give you the full scope. Okay, play. All right, so we're back to the story. And so what had happened was, when it caught the corner of my glove, the machine was rotating in this direction. So as you can imagine, my hand was pulled into the machine, under the machine, back up, back towards me, and then back down again. And I was like, ouch, or something like that, because it hurt really bad. Because I remember hearing, the first thing I remember is my wrist dislocating, and then my forearm and some other stuff happened. And you're hearing things, and yeah, that's good enough. So I started screaming, one, because it hurt, and two, because I wanted somebody to come turn the machine off, because the machine had started to pick me up off the ground at this point, and I was starting to be pulled in head first. And I'm hanging on. I'm grabbing onto the machine. I'm getting pulled in. There was actually scratches down the side of my face because the opening kind of narrowed in, and I'm getting pulled in. My neck's and I just got scratches all down the side of my face. And so a guy that was at the other end of the auger, he hears me screaming, and he turns around, And he visited me when I was in the hospital. He said, I saw you sticking out of the top of the machine. So he comes running down the stairs, runs around the machine, turns it off. Well, at this point, I'm way down into the machine. So I reach back with my left arm and I pull myself out. And when I did, my right arm was gone. And so I'm standing there, and the guy who's standing there, he's standing there just staring at me, and I'm kind of standing there staring at me too. And I don't know. Well, no, I'm not going to go into that because that might get too gross. But he just turns around and takes off running. And so I'm standing here with one arm, bleeding to death, and I'm thinking, well, I don't want to be by myself. So I took off after him. Which is something really smart to do when you're losing blood. Start running really fast and get your blood pumping faster. Genius idea. So if it ever happens, do that. So he takes off running, and I'm like, I'm going with him. And so, I'm running as fast as I can to try to catch up with him. And, stuff is flying, and it's just an experience. And I'm running, and I've been running for about 20 yards, and I'm like, where am I going? I'm just running right now. I have and so then I remembered there's an office that was about 50 or 75 yards away, and I said, well, I don't know where this guy's going, but that's where I'm going. And so we're running, and he goes up this flight of stairs that's going towards the office, and so we're heading in the same direction. So he gets to the top of the stairs, and he just grabs the door, and he just opens it and just gets out of the way, so I just come spraying when I come running by. And so I run up to this window where this office is, and there's a guy sitting on his desk talking on the phone. I can see him, but I had never had my arm ripped off by a machine before. So I was kind of figuring this out as I went along. I'd never read a book, what to do if you have your arm ripped off by a machine, So I just run up to the window, and I just stood there and looked in. I know. I wasn't a smart 9-year-old. I wasn't a very smart 18-year-old either. Because I'm just standing there just looking like, I didn't knock on the window. I didn't do anything. I just stood there looking at the guy. I didn't open the door. There's a door next to the window into the office where I could have been like, hey man, you got a Band-Aid or something? Because things are pretty bad out here right now. So he eventually, thank God, he looked up. He looked up and he saw me. And I was, what's up, man? And so he hung the phone up and he picked it back up. And so I knew then that he was calling for help. And so I was like, I'm just going to lay down. So I'm sure he probably where did that guy go? Because he sees me at one minute. Next thing I know, I'm just laying on the ground. Because I was tired. I was one arm and I was bleeding to death. And I'm just going to lay down. I need a nap. And so I lay down. And then one of the first guys to get to me was one of my old baseball coaches. He was actually my last baseball coach. Coached me in my last game before I lost my arm. And he was also worked out there at the plant, and he got there, and he knelt down beside me, and when he knelt down beside me, he put his knee right next to my face. And I know what he was doing. One, I had already seen a lot. Once you've kind of seen some of the stuff I've seen, bone and other stuff, it was nasty. It was nasty. And so he was probably trying to protect me. He didn't say, hey, he's seen enough. He doesn't need to see any more. And he probably didn't want me to see what he was about to do, because he took his hand and he found the artery that was where I was losing most of the blood, and he grabbed it and held it closed. And then another guy comes running up, and he was with the emergency service. Well, he comes running up and he starts taking his belt off, and I'm like, dude, what are you doing? I wanted to be like, keep your pants on, man. That's not going to help me. But what he did was he took his belt off and he cinched it around my arm, and he sucked that. And I'm like, man, I'm in enough pain as it is. And he's got that belt locked in. I had a scar on my arm for years from where he had cinched that belt in so tight, and he's just trying to keep me from losing more blood. And the thing is I don't know, my dad was one of the next people to get to me because he was in a meeting in the front office. And somebody just ran in and said, one of the college students has been hurt. And so my dad just immediately jumps up and takes off running. He's not going to wait for them to say meeting adjourned. He just jumps up and takes off running. And there's double doors in the meeting room, and he pushes those double doors open, and he said, please, God, don't let it be Jeff. And he said God spoke to him that quick and said, who do you want it to be then? And so my dad knew before he even got there that it was me. And God was preparing him for what was going to happen when he got there, because he had never seen anything like this before. You know, his son laying on the ground, his only son laying on the ground, arm ripped off, bleeding to death. And so when my dad gets there, I saw him come up, and when I saw the look on his face, I was like, that is a look I have never seen before. But he had never seen his son with only one arm before, so we were both kind of showing each other some new stuff and some new material. And so when I saw the look on his face, I don't know if I died or what was going on here. This part's kind of hard to explain, but it's like the next thing I knew, it was like I was floating up at the top of the building, and I was looking down on everything that was going on. I could see my body laying there, and I had this huge puddle of blood that had formed beside me, because it took a while for anybody to get there to help me, and I'm just bleeding out the whole time. And I saw where my coach was, and I saw my dad standing there, and he had a pager on his hip, and I saw him take it off, and I saw him throw it across, because it was a train shed is where the silo was. The trains would come in and drop everything off. And I saw him take that pager off, and I saw him throw it across the room, and it hit a train that was back behind me. And I was telling my dad later in the hospital, where everybody in the room was standing, everybody. I mean, people over here, people back here, people at my feet. And the thing is I wouldn't have known where anybody on my right-hand side was standing, because of where my coach had put his knee. He had put his knee right here so that I couldn't see anymore on my right-hand side. But I was telling him about people that were standing actually on the edge of the building looking in, because they didn't want to come in, but they're just kind of peeking in. And I'm telling him who they are and where they were standing and all this kind of stuff. And I really believe that's why God was preparing my dad before he even got there, because my dad ran around my body. I saw him run around my body, and he knelt down beside me, and he grabbed my hand, and he said, "Let's pray." And when he did, it was immediately I was back in my own body again and looking out of my own eyes again, and laying there on the floor. We said the Lord's Prayer together. And then from there, an ambulance comes and picks me up and takes me to the hospital. And it was a small town in North Carolina where they couldn't handle something like what I was dealing with. So they had already called a helicopter to come pick me up from Duke University Medical Center. Well, I'm a North Carolina Tar Heel fan, and they're flying people in from Duke to get me. And that's exactly, they were coming to get me. You know, they're like, we got one now. We can get him. You know, and because that's just something you don't want, you know. Duke and Carolina, that's like Carolina, Jesus, Duke, devil, right? So anyway, just in case you were unaware of that, sky's Carolina blue. So I'm thinking, man, if they found out I'm a Carolina fan, they're going to get me. You know, I was just don't scream out, "Go Tar Heels," like right in the middle of anything or something. You know, they might. And so they load me up on this helicopter. And the one thing I remember, I don't know why I remember, out of everything I was going through, the morphine they were giving me for the pain, because I'm experiencing pain like I've never experienced in my life. And so they're trying to just pump whatever drugs they can into me to try to take care of the pain. But the morphine made my nose itch like you wouldn't believe. I mean, it was like, oh my gosh. But at the same time, they were also pumping it into my arm. So I've got all these things in my arm, so I can't scratch my nose. And so I'm in the emergency room, and they are like wheeling me out to the helicopter. And the only thing I'm telling them is, tell whoever's on the helicopter to scratch my nose. And so they put me on the helicopter, and like they put this oxygen mask over my nose and mouth, and my nose is itching like crazy. And like there's a lady there, and are there any nurses in the house? A couple of you? Okay. I might need you later. But like they've got me on this thing, and she's doing all this stuff, and she's got like a computer or something. I don't know if she was checking Facebook or what, but but like I had this thing over my face, and my nose is itching like crazy. And I'm like, it's bad enough I've got one arm and it hurts really bad, but my nose, just at least scratch my nose. And so I would shake the mask off my face to try to tell her to scratch my nose, and she would just put it right back. I said, get me off this helicopter. I'm going to jump if you don't get me, scratch my nose. And so she scratched my nose like twice in like a 45-minute flight. So I'm dealing with bitterness issues. I'll get through that. I'll get through it. I mean, seriously, you would think out of all this stuff, I wouldn't remember that my nose itched that much. I remember it. Oh, gosh, it makes me want to scratch my nose. But it's just, So by the time they finally get me to Duke University Medical Center, I had lost 3/4 of my blood. I'm running on empty, and they're wheeling me in, and, they're giving me all this medicine and telling me, they're asking me questions, and I'm like, I don't know. I'm allergic to having one arm. I don't know. Just fix me. Just make me better, whatever you have to do. And so they give me the anesthesia for surgery to knock me out. And I don't know if, the guy didn't know how much blood I had lost, or if somebody said, hey, he's a Carolina fan, we can get him. And so, but when they gave me the anesthesia, it ended up being too strong for my system, and I went into full cardiac arrest, which if you don't know what that means, it basically means I was dead. I don't know how long. I've heard it was anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes, but, I was dead. I wasn't like, all right, it's been 44 seconds, and I would appreciate it if you would wake me up. I was out. People say, did you see anything? No. It was dark. So I don't know how long, but the next thing they did, it doesn't always work. They took a hypodermic needle about 4 inches long, and they stuck it into my heart and pumped me full of adrenaline, got my heart started again, and I was in surgery for 13 hours, and they were trying to figure out what all they could do my arm was really mangled, and they were trying to figure out if they could do anything with it, and they couldn't. So what they actually did was the palm of my hand made it all the way through the machine okay, because it was right next to the thread of the auger, so nothing ever happened to it. So they actually just cut the palm of my right hand off and attached it to the end of my arm, so they didn't have to graft skin from anywhere else on my body, which I was thankful for. And so I was in surgery for 13 hours. It was either 13 or 16. And then I was in the hospital for 16 days because before my accident, I was right-handed, and people were like, well, now you're left-handed. I was like, well, I'm only-handed, but whatever. And it was like they were trying to teach me things that I was going to have to learn how to do once I got out of the hospital because, I was right-handed purely. Like, my left hand was just there to assist my right. I did nothing left-handed. Sometimes in English class, when I got really bored, I would kind of try to write with my left hand, and I looked like I was in kindergarten. And so I never did anything left-handed. So they were trying to teach me how to do all this kind of stuff left-handed, And I'm thinking, it's not that big a deal. I'll figure it all out. And it was actually a lot bigger deal than I thought it would be. It's like trying to put your pants on with one hand. Man, unless it's jogging pants, that ain't easy. Why am I going into this story? But anyway, I was because my mom would offer to help me with a whole lot of stuff. I'm like, Mom, I'll figure my pants out. I'll get this one figured out. So I finally figured out a way to get my pants on and that kind of stuff, and like brushing my teeth. That was a tough one. Tying my shoes. Now I just normally get somebody to tie them, and then I just slide my foot in and out of them. But it seemed like every day after I got out of the hospital, because like I said, I was in the hospital for 16 days. Then after I got out of the hospital, I started college 16 days later. I don't even know how to write yet. We're sitting in class one time having to do an in-class assignment where we have to write a full-page paper in class. This was before everybody had laptops and stuff, when you had to actually write with a pencil and a sheet of paper. I know that's very rare these days, but pencil and a sheet of paper. And so I start working on this paper, and I was only taking 2 classes because I was having to go to the doctor up to Duke once or twice a week, and that was a 2-hour drive from my hometown. So I couldn't take a whole lot of classes because I was constantly going to the doctor. And so all of my professors, I had 2 teachers, and it was actually a husband and a wife. One was teaching English, and the other one was teaching psychology. And so they both knew this had just happened to me, and I was still learning how to adapt and all this kind of stuff. Well, I'm writing this paper in class, and I'm looking, my stepsister is sitting next to me, and she's like almost done, and I've got the first paragraph finished. And so I start the second paragraph, and I made a mistake, and I went to erase, but you never realize how important that second hand is when it comes to erasing until it's not there. And so I just went to erase, and I started doing like this because I couldn't hold the paper still, and I ripped my paper right down the middle. And I was like, you son of a gun. I cannot believe you just did that. And so I'm looking at my paper, and I'm like, have I got to start all? It took me 45 minutes to write a paragraph in 2 sentences, and I've got to start all over again. And I look up at my teacher, and she says, don't worry about it. And I was like, okay. So I went on ahead, and I finished that out. But But it seemed like every day something new was coming up that I couldn't do. And I started getting like really mad, depressed, suicidal. I mean, I hated my life. I mean, absolutely just, I didn't care if I died. I didn't care what happened to me. I hated my life. I hated it. And I was mad at God because I had been in church my entire life. I went to church 3 years in a row without missing a single Sunday. They gave me an award at my church for going 3 years in a row without missing a single Sunday. I got a little lapel pin to go. I'm like, can a brother get a TV or something for it? That's 3 years, man. Come on. I got a little lapel pin with a cross on it. And I'm like, all right, go cross. But I mean, I was always in church. And I'm thinking, God, I went to church my whole life. And you did this to me? And that's where I was wrong, because God didn't do this to me. You know, the Bible says in John 10:10 that the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but that Jesus came to give us life and life more abundantly. I was mad at God, and it wasn't even his fault. There's so many people that are so mad at God over something that it's not even him. The devil just does his job well. He steals, he kills, and he destroys. But the thing is God does his job well too. He gives us life and life more abundantly. Man, I'm telling you, like, my life now, it's pretty awesome. I mean, I've got some issues that are going on in my life right now, like big time struggles, but my life's good because I know Jesus. And man, life, I just don't see how people, honestly, I don't see how people make it through life without Jesus. Ugh. I definitely don't see how you're going to make it in life after life without Jesus. We'll talk about that later. But here I am. I'm dealing with all this stuff, this anger, this depression, these suicidal thoughts. I mean, if somebody had two arms, there's a good chance I didn't like you. I mean, you had two arms, you had at least half of one more than I did. You know, I didn't like you. Two arms, nope, not a friend. It's pathetic, but it's kind of true. I mean, I had friends that I had, you know, but if I saw, just seeing people with two arms sometimes just made me mad because, like, I'm looking at them and I'm like, that's not me, you know? And I hated my life. As selfish as it was as an 18-year-old, I didn't have two arms and I hated my life. I didn't care if I died. There'd be times I'd be driving home from college. I went to college at Appalachian State up in the mountains, and I'd be like, I could pull off this cliff right now and everybody thinks it's an accident. Nobody knows that I just killed myself on purpose. And that's the kind of stuff that I was dealing with. And so after one semester of college real close to home, I transferred up to Appalachian State. And a bunch of my buddies from high school, two of my best friends in the world that I had been in school with since kindergarten were up there. And, you know, so I go up there, and one of my buddies was a football player. He was a punter and a kicker for the football team there. And he and I were roommates. And he, anytime the football players were going to go do something, they always invited me. I felt like the mascot. It's like we're the Appalachian State one-arms or something, you know. And whatever they were going to go do, they would say, hey, Jeff, do you want to go do it with us? And 9 times out of 10, I said yes. You know, if it was like a clapping contest, I was going to stay home. But, you know, like they were going rock climbing. They're like, hey, do you want to go rock climbing? I was like, yeah, I'll try. I'll go ahead and tell you this. I'm not good at rock climbing, and I have the scars to prove it. So I quit that. If at first you don't succeed, try again. That doesn't really count for one-armed people in rock climbing because you want to live. So I quit, no more rock climbing. But one day they were going to go play basketball. And they're like, hey, Jeff, do you want to go play basketball with us? And I'm like, sure, I'll go play. And so we get there, and we're there just shooting before the game, you know, just before the game starts. Everybody's kind of warming up, shooting shots and stuff. And so I started counting to see how many players we had because, you need 10 players to play full court basketball. Well, we had 11. And I'm thinking, well, somebody's not going to get picked. I wonder who that's going to be, you know? So I'm looking at all the guys. I was like, please let there be a guy here with no arms. Please let there be a guy here with no arms. And sure enough, there wasn't. I was the only one-armed guy there. So they all picked up teams. And believe it or not, I didn't get picked. I know that comes across as a surprise. So I'm just like, well, whatever. So I just grabbed a ball, and I went off on another goal and was just overshooting by myself. And at Appalachian State, there were 4 full-court basketball courts. right next to each other, and there's a track that goes around them, with nets that hang down between the courts and the track, so that when you're shooting, the balls don't go bouncing off in the track and stuff. And so I'm just over there. I'd watch them play for a little while, and then I'd shoot a couple shots. Well, if you see a one-armed guy shooting basketball, you might give a second look. It's like that's probably something you don't see every day. It's like, hey, there's a guy shooting basketball. Wow, he's got one arm. Oh, he's airball. Shocking. And so here I am shooting, and people would walk by and they'd look, and they'd typically look back a second time. They'd look for just a little bit, and then they'd walk off. I'm used to getting stared at. I don't like it. I'm used to it, though. I mean, people stare at me constantly, and I'm not that good looking, so it's probably not that. So I'm thinking it's the one-arm thing, and so, people stare. But there was this one girl, I just didn't understand, because I'm just standing there, and most of the time I was just shooting free throws. And so I'm standing there, and she walked by. The first time she walked by, she looked at me, and then she looked back, and then she looked until she had left my court. She stared at me the whole time. And I'm like, hey, and so I just go back and shooting again. Well, then she comes walking back around the second time. And as soon as she gets to my court, she starts staring at me, and she stares at me the entire time until she walks past my court. And she comes back around the third time, and she does it again. And I'm just like, you are in college. You really need to get over this. You're going to see stranger things in life than a one-armed guy shooting a basketball, I promise. So stop staring at me. And then the fourth time, I'm talking she's walking so slow, she's almost walking backwards when she's walking by me. And I wanted to be I was starting to get mad. I was going to be like, come on, come get you some. But I didn't want to get beat up by a girl, so I didn't do that. So I'm just I'm just going to stand, and I'm just it started getting on my nerves, but then I don't know how some of you other guys are, but after a while, after lap 10, and she stares at me every time she comes by, I started thinking, wait a minute, she's checking me out. She likes this one-armed goodness that she's looking at, I've never said that before in my life. I have no idea where that came from. Lord, I have no idea. No clue. Oh, man, I have no idea. Like I said, feel free to laugh. It's okay. So then I'm thinking, she's checking me out. I'm not going to go up and talk to her because I'm too scared. I have no confidence. One-armed guys don't go hit on girls a whole lot. And so I'm just I'm not going to go say anything to her. She'll have to come say something to me. How can I make that easier on her? Because I'm a gentleman. And so instead of shooting free throws, I figured I'll go over to the baseline where it's closer to the track. That way she doesn't have to walk as far to come talk to me. I'm a gentleman. And so sure enough, the first time I get over close to the baseline, she comes walking up, and she just slides the curtain out of the way, and she comes walking up to me. And then I was like, I should have thought of something to say because I've got nothing. So she came up, and she's like, hey. And I was like, how you doing? It's just, I mean, I really don't know what. I mean, I feel like I'm in kindergarten. I'm looking at my shoes and playing in the dirt that's not even there because it's a hardwood floor. And so she just starts talking to me and stuff. And she's like, I saw you shooting baskets. And I was like, yeah, I know. And so what do you say? It's like, thanks. And so she just starts talking, and I can tell she's wanting to ask me something. I was like, go ahead, girl. Ask me out. I know you want to. Go ahead. And so she's like, well, I was just kind of wondering. I was like, I was thinking, would you be interested? Mm-hmm. Would you like to go to church with me sometime? Nope. I wouldn't. That's what I'm thinking. I didn't say it because I thought she was cute. But she was like, would you like to go to church sometime? And I'm like, gosh. You have to remember, I'm still mad at God. I don't know John 10:10 at this time. I'm like, well, he took my arm, but you want me to go. I'm mad at him, and you're cute. Yeah, I'll go to church with you. Yeah. I'm telling you, man, cute girls, y'all can win some guys for Jesus. It's easy. Just invite them to church, and Pastor Darryl will take care of the rest of it. We're gullible. We think you like us. We know. You know it's not the truth. We don't. Just invite them to church. They'll get saved, and then they'll get right with Jesus, and everything will be good, and you can be like, you never had a chance. So she invites me to church, and I decided that I would go with her. I was like, yeah, I'll go, because the way it was with me when I grew up going to church, every time we went to church afterwards, we always went out to eat. So it was still kind of like a date anyway. So I was like, yeah, I'll go to church with you. So we go to church and, walk into church. And I was raised in a Methodist church. And I'm thankful for that church because I learned a lot of things as a kid. But at my Methodist church, there was an organ on this side and a piano on this side. And that was it. And I walked into this church, and there was like instruments like this, kind of like, wow, almost exactly like this now that I look at it. And I thought, well, they must have had some kind of concert here or something last night. That's the only thing, because I'd never seen, I didn't know instruments were allowed in church, because in my church at that time, my mom is a Methocostal. She's one of those Methodist tongue talkers. And so is my grandma. My grandma, I used to hear her praying in tongues, and I used to just try to do it too. And I could always remember her saying Hakatika, Hakatika. So I just sit there and go, Hakatika, Hakatika. I have no idea what Hakatika means. But so we had some Methocostals in my church, and my grandma was Hakatika. So when you see my grandma in heaven, just walk over and say Hakatika, and she'll know. She'll know. She probably doesn't even know I've ever told that story before either. But at that time, like, you didn't make noise in my church. Like, if you coughed, everybody looked at you like, sorry. It was just one of those deals. It was just like, you don't make noise. You don't, anybody have any prayer requests? And nobody ever had any prayer requests. Anybody have any unspoken requests by uplifted hands? And everybody's hand will go up. And I'm just like, I don't get that. What's the deal with the unspoken request? Just speak it. So people know what they're praying for. Do you have any unspoken requests? I'd be like, do you know what you want to eat? What is it? Speak your request. Let them be made known. So anyway, but I go to this church and I see all these instruments and stuff, and I'm like, well, that's interesting. I've never seen anything like that before. And so I go over and I get in the section and sit next to the cute girl, and it's basically all college students around me. And so they start playing. And they actually started playing the instruments in church. And I'm like, well, this is different. And it was one of those, I didn't know what praise and worship was. I called it fast music and slow music. And so they started the fast music. And everybody around me starts jumping up and down. And I'm just standing there, and I'm like, looking around, and I'm like, I didn't want to fully get off the ground because I wasn't that committed. But I was like, I'll at least go up on my toes a little bit. And so they're all doing that, and then the slow music starts, and everybody stops with the hopping, so I stopped with the hopping, and people start doing this right here, and I'm like, I didn't even hear the question, so I hope they don't call on me because I don't know the answer, So I'm standing there like this. It's like I'm kind of half getting it up because just please don't let them call on me because I don't know. I really don't know. And so after that, everybody sat down. I was like, well, that's something we did at my church. So I sat down, and I'm sitting there. And this speaker gets up, and it was kind of like a little revival type service. And he was a missionary, and he had been over in Africa forever. He'd been over in Africa for so long, and so he gets up and he starts talking about all these things he's seen God do. And you have to remember that I'm still mad at God. I was doing the half hop and the don't call on me, raising your hand. But I'm mad at him. So he gets up there and he starts talking about God, and I'm just like, yeah, I don't like that guy. And he starts going into all these stories. And I enjoy listening to people tell stories. That's one of the things I loved about Brother Hagin, listening to Brother Hagin. I could listen to him tell stories until Jesus came. And I hope he gets to tell his stories up in heaven because I'm sure there's some I never heard. But I love listening to people tell stories. So he started telling some stories. I was like, well, I'll at least listen. And so he starts talking about, I've seen dead people raised to life. And I'm like, it's a cool story, but I don't really care. He's like, I've seen blind eyes open. And I was like, whoopee, He's like, I've seen deaf people able to hear. And I'm like, yay. And he goes, I've seen arms grow out. I was like, what? You saw what now? You saw arms grow out? Is there like a sign-up sheet for that or something? Because, I will sign up for that, And so obviously at this point, he has my attention because I'm seriously thinking, I'm getting my arm tonight. That's my thought process. I'm getting my arm tonight. And I had already made up my mind. I'm getting my arm. I'm getting in my car. I'm driving home, and I'm showing my mom. I'm going to drive home and show my mom out because I was getting my arm that night. That's it. He said it. I'm going to go ahead and get my arm tonight, and then I'm going to go home. So now he's got my attention because I need to figure out what kind of steps I need to do, 1, 2, 3, and 4 to make, boom, abracadabra arm. You know, that would have been so cool if it had popped out right there. But that was my thought process. So now he's got my attention because I want to figure out, all right, how does this happen? What do you have to do to make an arm pop out? Because you've done it, and obviously I haven't because I would have done it by now. And so he starts talking about that. He starts talking about the goodness of God. And he starts talking about all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, gosh, he's talking about how good God is, and I'm mad at this God that he's talking about because I think God took my arm, and he's got a God who's giving arms back. And so he had my attention at this point. And at the end of the service, he gave an altar call, you know, and he's like, if anybody here, if you don't know Jesus as your Lord and Savior, then, you know, tonight's the night for you to know Jesus. And so the cute girl sitting next to me, she goes, are you a Christian? I was like, yeah, I think so. She's like, well, how do you know? I was like, well, I've been in church my whole life. I was like, seriously, my whole life I went to church. I'm telling her, this is my answer for why I'm a Christian. I went to church my whole life. I was like, I used to be the president of our youth group. So, yeah, me and Jesus, like I am like Jesus Jr. You know, I am up there. I am right, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. If they're going to add a fourth one to the Trinity, it'd probably be me. I mean, I'm right there. So I'm really thinking I'm good. And so I'm giving her all my reasons. She said, would you like to go forward just to be sure? I was like, it won't hurt. You know, it won't hurt to go forward. So I went up front and there was a row of us. I mean, it probably would have covered the front of the church. And he's like, all right. And so the guy, he leads us in the sinner's prayer. And I'm thinking, well, that's cool. You know, he prayed for each one of us. He said, now I want to come down and pray for each one of you individually. And I'm thinking, okay, well, that'll be fine. And now I have never been in a prayer line before in my life. I've never seen a prayer line before. I don't know prayer line etiquette. I don't know that you're supposed to stand here and face forward until the minister gets to you and then he's there for you. So I'm standing down here on this end, and he starts down there. So I just did this and just watched to see what he was doing because I just want to know what's going on because I've never seen it before. And I saw him reach up and put his hands on the person's head. And as soon as I saw him do that, I stood back up. I was like, I don't want him to touch me. Because at that time, I was really weird. Well, I'm going to let that go. I just didn't like being touched. This is my space. Stay out of my space or I will hit you in your Facebook. You know, this is me. This is my bubble. And you can talk to me outside of my bubble, but just don't get in my bubble. And so I'm just thinking, just don't touch me. You can come pray for me. I'll even give you a high five or something, but just don't get up in this region. And so he's working his way down, and I'm just sitting here thinking, please, just don't touch me when you get here. Just don't. And so he's getting closer. He's like 2 or 3 people away, so I just close my eyes, thinking maybe if I close my eyes, he won't see me. And so I'm standing there like this, and I'm like, just don't touch me when you get here. And so now he's right here, and he gets in front of me, and sure enough, he puts his hands on me. And I didn't like it. But the main reason was because I was now laying on the floor. And I was like, he seemed like such a nice man. I mean, I really didn't have a clue what was going on. I was like, he just prayed for me to have Jesus come into my heart. And now he's throwing me down on the floor in church. You don't get on the floor in church. That's one thing my mom always told me. Get off the floor. So I'm thinking, what is... And so, like, I'm serious. I am laying on the floor in church, and now I'm mad and I'm embarrassed because I'm like, oh, what's the cute girl going? There's no way she's going to go out with me. Now I'm laying on the ground in church, and so I'm laying there and just like, why would he push me down? I really didn't know what was going on, but while I'm laying there, I've got my eyes closed, but I could hear something like right here, like, so I kind of rolled my head over and I opened up this eye, and there was somebody laying next to me, and I was like, well, that's interesting. So I closed that eye and I rolled my head over this way and I opened this eye up and there was somebody laying next to me over here. And I was like, I guess that's just what they do in this church, you know? You just lay here and then when the buzzer goes off, everybody gets up and we go back to our seat, you know? I mean, y'all think I'm making this up. I'm serious as a heart attack. I was waiting on somebody to tell me when it was time for me to get up. I'd still be laying there probably if somebody didn't be like, hey man, let's go back to the seat. All right, I didn't know it was time. I know, but I didn't hear the buzzer. You know, I had no clue. I mean, dumb as a box of rocks when it came to spiritual stuff. Dumb as a box of rocks. But the one thing I do know that happened is the guy who went down and the guy who stood up were two completely different people. I didn't have a clue what happened, but Jesus did something. The anger, the bitterness, the depression, it was like the weight of the world. I almost felt like I was going to float back to my seat because there was nothing like pushing me down. And I'm like, this is cool. I like this. And even though I'm a baby Christian, I don't even know I just got saved. I don't know what's going on, but I'm like, this Jesus guy, he's all right. I like him. I'm going to hang out with him for a while. And so I started getting involved in campus ministry there at Appalachian State, and we had opportunities to go out and do some youth things and minister to some kids and stuff. And one time I was asked to speak, and everything I've said up to this point revolves around what I'm about to tell you right now. So if you hadn't heard anything I've said, just focus in with me for about 5 minutes, because this is it. Because I'd been, going around speaking and stuff and, doing little things. The first time I spoke, I was so nervous I could not hold the microphone because I was shaking so bad that I would literally have beat my face to death. So somebody stood next to me and held the microphone like this while I just stood there with my hand in my pocket and kind of leaned and talked into them. I was that nervous. It was 200 kids I spoke to, and one 13-year-old boy got up and gave his life to Jesus. And I'm like, Jesus, that was cool. If you want me to do that again, let me know. And that's how I talked to him, because it was just like I talked to anybody. I was just like, I'll do that more if you want me to. And that was the beginning of my call. That was when I really started sensing the call of God on my life to go into ministry. And I had this opportunity to go to Taylorsville, North Carolina, speak at an event called One Way. And at that time, in the past 6 months, they had 6 teenagers die by either suicide or car accident in the last 6 months. So part of this service was they lit a candle for each one of these teenagers at the beginning of the service, part of it as just like a memorial to them. And it was also, we were doing as an outreach to this community and to bring Jesus into this community. And when they started lighting these candles, I started crying. And that was really unusual for me because I've never been one to cry much. Like even when I lost my arm, I was in the hospital like 6 or 7 days before I cried for the first time. And I've just never been a person to cry very much. So when they started lighting these candles, I'm like, well, anytime somebody dies, it's sad. But especially like a teenager or a little kid, because they never really had a chance at life, And so I'm like, that's sad. But I'm thinking, I've never even been to Taylorsville. I don't know anything. I wouldn't know these kids from Adam's House Cat. I've never met them. So why am I crying like this? And before long, I went from crying to sobbing uncontrollably. I'm sitting, like if the podium is here, I would have been sitting right here where this gentleman is sitting, and I had my head between my knees, bawling. I've got people sitting around me, laying hands on me. I was a little bit cooler with people touching me then. Laying hands on me, praying for me, Lord, you better dry this up because he's got to speak in like 5 minutes. You need to shut this down right now. And I have no control. I mean, I can't stop. Because normally, if you cry, you can kind of suck it up and really try to suck it back in. Especially us dudes, we can suck a tear back in, like, dehydrate yourself in a heartbeat. But I have no control. I am bawling. And even though I was a baby Christian, I knew God's dealing with me about something. So I prayed this really, this spiritual, deep. I'm surprised it's not written in Ephesians. It's so deep. I said, God, what's up? Write that down. Put that in your notes. That was my prayer. I said, God, what's up? I couldn't say much else. It was God, what's up? And he reminded me that after my accident, I had always said, why me? And I did. I said, why me? All the time. God, why me? I was the president of the youth group. Before that, I was the vice president. I spoke in our church as a little kid. Why me? I gave God a list of candidates who were more qualified to lose arms than I was. There was this one guy in particular, I'm like, God, why not him? He is bad. And he was like a drug dealer. He had 3 kids already and was still in high school. And I'm just like, There's no comparison. He's much worse than me. Funny thing is, that guy's a preacher now. So figure that one out. But I'm giving God a list of candidates who, you messed up on this one. It should have been him. But God, he said, you never asked me why I let you live that day. All right, I'll ask you now. I mean, I'm getting ready to speak, so I figure it's not going to be anything too super deep. He's just going to be like, because I thought you were cool or something like that. But he spoke to me, audibly. I heard it. And I'm sitting there still with my head between my knees. And he spoke to me. Dang. And he said, I try to get through this part every time. I tell people don't cry much, and then I get here. He said, if you would have died that day, you would have gone to hell. That floored me. If you thought I wasn't crying before that, I lost it. If you would have died that day, you would have gone to hell. If it wasn't for the goodness of God, I would be burning in hell right now. So how could I not give my life to let him do with it whatever he wants? I died July 22nd, 1993. And after a couple years of running, Jesus came alive in me. And this is his show. I told him, God, wherever you want me to go, whatever you want me to do, whoever you want me to tell, if I can keep one person out of hell, I'll share it with everybody I meet. And that's why I'm here. I was here for the men's conference, and man, I had a blast. I got to tie y'all's associate pastor up and weigh him down with a ton of weights, and that was fun. And we actually had a guy accept Christ that night at the men's conference. That's what I live my life for. It's for Jesus, seeing people come to Jesus. And I don't know where everybody is this morning as far as where you're at in your relationship with God. And if y'all want to get ready, Curtis. I don't know where y'all are with God right now. Maybe everybody in here, you're walking with Jesus and everything's good. And if that's so, then praise God. Let's just be a big old party in here. But maybe there's somebody in here, you've never accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior. And this morning was a wake-up call. Or maybe you know you're not living your life the way you're supposed to and you need to get some things right this morning. So maybe that's a wake-up call for you. Or maybe you're just like me when that girl said, "Are you a Christian?" I said, "Yeah, I think so." I didn't know for sure. I thought I was. But the thing is I was on my way to hell and I had no idea. And I can't walk out of this building today and not give you that opportunity because I can't have it resting on me. I've got to at least give you the opportunity. So if everybody would, just bow your heads and close your eyes for me. If you've never accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior, then this morning is for you.